Welcome to Mining the Mysteries, a catechetical podcast that explores the depths of our Orthodox and Catholic faith in the English tradition. I'm Matthew Stewart, Digital Media Director for the Anglican Province of America, along with your hosts Father Wade Miller and Father Randall Russell from St. Philip's Anglican Church in Blacksburg, Virginia. We're glad to have you with us as we dig deeper into the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. Okay, folks, welcome back. We have another special episode. Once again, we have Mrs. Bridget Williams with us, who has just gotten back from the Olympics recently. So we're going to talk to her about how that went and some of the trials that she faced while she was there. Father Miller, go ahead and kick us off on this interview with Miss Bridget.
Welcome back, Bridget.
Thank you.
It's great to have you back.
It's good to be back, that's for sure.
Yeah, and there's still a buzz around here about your accomplishments, and making it to the Olympics is pretty incredible. Since the last time we talked, which was probably about a month ago, we were talking in the anticipation of you going to Paris, France to compete in the Olympics. Now we're in the aftermath of that, and there was a lot that happened in the Olympics outside of Bridget Williams. We won't get into all that because everybody's pretty, I think, clear of what happened and some of the controversies and things like that. We're not going to focus on that. However, I would like for you to talk about your journey, and what I mean by that is what we didn't say on the podcast last time. Part of it's because we needed to keep some things hush-hush. And so some of the adversity that you dealt with and leading even up to France, going to France, and then some of the things that happened when you were there that were some trials that you had to navigate. So not to put you on the spot, but do you care to elaborate on some of that?
Yeah, sure. So, I feel like any athlete's success journey, or just journey in general, is never linear. You have, constant troughs and trials and adversity, and you may only have one or two athletes that you can recall that have had this great lead up to a big match or the Olympics or whatever. And so I guess mine is no different in terms of facing those trials and tribulations. And so right after I got home from the national championships, which was a huge feat in and of itself, making the Olympic team, etc., I ripped my hand open. I broke a pole, a first practice back, really at the five or six jumps in. And it was a really humbling moment because, you come home from the Olympic trials and you've just made your first Olympic team, and the buzz is unlike anything you've ever experienced. And, if you guys recall, I think I spoke about it on my last podcast interview, and I said, I barely made the final in the Olympic trials, and I felt like God had really pushed me through to the final. He took me out of the prelim, put me in that final, and I made a vow to myself that I wouldn't take that opportunity for granted. And so, that whole experience was like, okay, this is exactly where I'm meant to be. And this is, like you're kind of just riding that high. And I felt like I had immense grace from God and mercy, because the pole vault is just a merciless event, if that's even a word. You just don't get it often. And so to come home, and have my first practice only a few days later, and then for that to happen, I broke a pole. Our guess is that it was probably just a little bit damaged and dinged or worn or who knows what. I mean, it's really hard to tell. But basically what happens when a pole breaks is what can happen, doesn't always happen, but what can happen is that it ruptures the webbing between the thumb and the pointer finger. I mean, that's exactly what happened. I had 12 stitches in my hand on July 5th. And so we had about 3 weeks to heal. And at the time I thought, okay, this is something I can heal from. It's not ideal, and I'm going to miss some jump sessions, but I can still run. And, we were able to modify some lifting. So I was still able to train. I just wasn't able to jump because I couldn't grip with the left hand because the stitches were still in there until the stitches came out. So I knew I would have stitches for about 10 days. And then from there out, it would be okay. But our choice, my coach and I's choice not to publicize it, I guess, is because you just don't need the extra noise. It's already stressful enough. In a really good way. It wasn't like I wasn't feeling like bad stress or bad chaos. It was just the people who needed to know knew, and then we just dealt with it. We dealt with it behind closed doors, and I was happy with how that turned out, because I guess our reasoning too was that we knew it was something that we'd heal from. We had several other examples of people who have done this. It's a common injury, more common than we'd like to admit, but we do know several people who've had the same injury and have come back with no issue. And so at the time, we thought that was the least of our worries. And little do we know what we had coming for us when we got to Paris. But should I keep going, or should I stop there?
No, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then we got to Paris, and my hand healed perfectly. It has no problems. I lost no feeling. I didn't have any tenderness, and I had a really good physical or occupational therapist in town here who really went above and beyond to help and make sure that I was, ready to go and be as sharp as I could be at that time before I left for Paris. And so when we showed up in Paris, we had 2 jump sessions, and the first one went great. We jumped 5 lefts. I was still wrapping my hand a little bit, but I was able to, execute jumps, all things considered, because I hadn't really jumped, like I said, in about 3 weeks, or I guess it was 2 weeks at this time. And then the following week, the Monday, so a week out from the prelim, I had a long run session that was a little bit, it was like a rust buster, I guess you can say. It wasn't a great practice outside, but I hadn't gone long run since the national championships. And so I was just feeling accomplished enough to get on long run poles and at least I think I completed 2 jumps in the air, but I was trusting that, the hay was in the barn, that the work was done, and that I would just, what was going to serve me the best is just showing up on competition day a week later with just confidence and knowing that I had done the work. And I fully trusted that I would execute. I would do what I needed to do to advance myself to the final. And then, which is just funny. I mean, I laugh about it now because there's nothing else you can do about it. It's just kind of comical. You can't make it up. But then I got food poisoning or norovirus, or I don't know what, some sort of GI sickness or virus that hit me pretty hard on Wednesday. So only 5 days before the Olympic qualification for the women's vault, which was on Monday, the 5th of August. And it just took me out. Like, I had never been that sick, maybe with the exception of COVID. But I mean, I pride myself on having a really strong stomach. Like, I've never, had issues during hard workouts or anything. I can stomach a whole meal before I go to practice, and so for whatever happened to me, I won't go into the details, but it was bad. But it was really bad, and I think at the time I was kind of fooling myself. Well, not fooling myself, but just not admitting to myself how sick I actually probably was, because I knew that I had to compete in 5 days. And so I was just going to endure whatever I had and then hope for the best on Monday. And still in my head, I thought, okay, I can do hard things. And, I mean, going back to, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think worth speaking on, like going back to the trials, I read the book of Esther, and she has a really cool story about, like being made for a certain moment and doing a hard thing, or, she was called to do something that was out of her comfort zone. And I kept thinking about that. And I thought about that going into the Olympic trials final, and it served me well. And I felt like that was a moment of inspiration that I could pull upon and think about, okay, like there have been several women before me or men that have done hard things, and I'm no different. Like, God gave me these talents, and I can not fulfill, but I can act on these gifts or use these gifts even when situations are hard. And so I was trying to like recall that and reframe this situation. But, the reality of the fact is I was just really sick. I was weak, and I say this not for like a pity me, but my resting heart rate was like high 70s, and normally it's low 50s when I'm sleeping. And so my Whoop band was just telling me, hey, you're in the high stress zone for like 14, 15 hours a day. And so you're fighting something. And I was sleeping, I was sleeping 9-10 hours plus taking naps, just trying to recover. And the team dogs did what they could, but at the same point, at the same time, you can only do what you can do, and your body's going to take its time. So that was my lead up into the Olympic qualification. And while I was feeling better that Monday, I think I had just lost a lot of mass or enough mass for it to matter. And my strength probably wasn't exactly where it should have been, even though like that Saturday I did the activation lift and didn't have to I didn't modify any of my numbers. I still had strength. I just think the endurance that the vault requires, I just didn't have it. And I think it's important to say too, like, it's so challenging as is to make calls in the vault. And then when you yourself are not in your normal state, you and your coach are then forced to just like randomly guess. Basically, you're trying to guess what corrections to make or what poles to jump on or where to put the grip, or, it's like you're trying to make calls, but you're not the same person on the runway. And so that's really hard because we haven't experienced that this year at all. Every meet we've gone to, I've been relatively healthy. And so we have our routine. And so it was a little bit harder for us to gauge what to do exactly. But, I think Father Miller and I have talked about this before. I think, when you think about coveting something, I read somewhere, and correct me if I misspeak or talk out of line, but it talks about if you're to covet, you're kind of like disrespecting what God has given you or has meant for you. And even good or bad, you should view what you have in your situations as a gift from God. Like, He wouldn't place these in your life if they weren't meant for you or if they weren't part of your story. And for a while, especially right after the Olympic qualification, I was like, I do not want this career. I do not want to have the career I'm having in the vault. I want it to be different. I know it can be different. And it wasn't until, a few weeks had passed by where I was like, what an insult. Like, what an insult to even say that or to even think those things, because, think about 4 years ago in 2021, I would have taken just to be at the Olympics, and now I'm here acting ungrateful to not have medaled or not have jumped my best, And so I don't know, I'm learning through those trials, and it's not a pity me, it's just the reality of the fact. But I think you learn your strongest and most valuable lessons when you're going through hardship. And I think something that I'm learning is that, you can always be more humble. Just when you think you've made it, I think sometimes you get reminded that, okay, yeah, you did something good, but you still have to find some humility, even if it's not, like outwardly, I'm not like, oh yeah, I made the Olympic team, but inward, like, I think it's definitely a season of like pruning some, I don't know the right word, like righteousness, I guess. I don't know, self-righteousness to want to be like the very, very best and know that I deserve it and whatnot. But yeah, I guess I'm just learning.
Yeah. Well, the opposite of coveting is contentment. And that's something that we can talk about around a table, living that. I'm just telling you as a priest, that is, I get up and I'll teach or preach and talk about contentment. And then my own life, it's like, I am not content at all. And I'm always thinking about the next best thing or, all of that. And as an athlete, it's even, I think, more of a challenge because the idea is you're not wanting to be content with the status quo, right? You're pushing yourself to go higher, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think your attitude is spot on. In 2021, you didn't make the Olympic team.
Wasn't even close.
Yeah. 2024, you not only made the Olympic team, you won the qualifying event to get you to the Olympics. You won that. And then you go over and, how many days before you went to the Olympics did you slice your hand open?
Well, it was July 5th. So, and then we left on the 24th, 3rd.
So like 23rd. Roughly around 3 weeks before you left, you had less than a month to try to heal 12 stitches in your hand. And, again, this wasn't in your ankle or something like that, this is the very instrument, your hands, that you use to lift, to get to catapult. I know I'm not using the right terms, but to basically catapult you over a bar 15 feet up in the air, So, and we didn't talk about that on the podcast for obvious reasons. That's something that needed to be stay in-house. But so you had that. Then you go over to the Olympics, and then you get some funky intestinal thing that is making you very sick. I just have a couple follow-up questions for people listening. So when that happened 3 weeks before the Olympics and you broke that pole, did that happen, say, when you were, putting the pole into the ground to go up, or when did that happen?
Yeah, so when a pole is going to break, it traditionally breaks when it's fully bent. So you're in the middle of the jump, the pole is completely, flexed to its max, basically. And so you are hanging there pretty much horizontal, not quite upside down, but not, your feet are, kind of like out in front of you. You're on your back pretty much. And that's why sometimes it's split. It's a rupture, it splits the webbing. We went to the emergency room. They're like, did you get hit? Are you impaled with carbon fiber or whatever? And I'm like, no, nothing hit me. The poles, the handle of the pole, the top of the pole where I'm gripping remains in your hand. It's just the blunt force and energy that has to be released somehow, because when that pole breaks, it's fully loaded. You have loaded it off the ground, and put all your energy into it. And so when it releases, it goes into the hand. And the best way that I've heard it described is from my coach, who says if you have freezing cold hands, if you've stuck your hands in ice water in the snow, and then you grip a wooden baseball bat and smack it as hard as you can against a tree, like that's the best feeling that you can kind of relate it to, in layman's terms. So
the energy that was going to basically sling your body over the pole,
yes,
it doesn't sling your body, it just goes into your hand.
That's right.
And it just busts it open.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, sometimes it won't. Like this happened to me from a shorter run back in 22, I believe. It was the fall of 22. I was doing a shorter run. I think I was going 4 lefts or something, which is a short run, a practice run on a very small pole, but it actually broke my scaphoid bone. It didn't rupture my skin, but it broke a small bone in my wrist that is very slow to heal. Which I was thankful, like it could always be worse. And so I was very thankful that didn't happen this time around, because if it had, I would have been totally out. Like I would have never been able to go to the Olympics, because it wouldn't have healed in time. So there are small, I guess, signs of grace.
Yeah.
Where it could have been worse. And so, yeah.
So when something like that happens, I know this is not a good analogy, but I had a friend that wanted a motorcycle. He grew up riding motorcycles. And so when he got married, he went out and got a motorcycle. And just kind of a freak accident, he actually slid on some gravel and he tore his leg up. And the next day, he put the motorcycle up for sale and said, I'll never get on a motorcycle, because it scared him that much. With something like that happens, breaking your wrist in 2022, or then slicing your hand open, 3 weeks before the Olympics, does that make you then gun shy? Is that in your head when you go to jump the next time?
This time more so than the first go around. So I've broken several poles in my career. I think this is my 4th pole break. I broke 1 in high school, 1 in college with no injury either of those times. And then obviously the one in 2022, I broke my hand, and then this one ruptured my skin. And so, yeah, I felt like this one shook me up a little bit. And I feel like it was just having gone through it and recovered from it, and having been back from the Olympics and just reflecting on the whole thing, the whole build up. I feel like I have accomplished things that, or like made it through the other side of things that I have been like the most afraid of. I remember when I broke my hand in 2022, I was like, gosh, I'm so grateful I didn't split my hand open, because I don't like blood and I don't do good with cuts. And, that just like wigs me out a lot. And so and I don't like stitches, never had stitches, never broke a bone. That first pull break in 2022 was my first broken bone in my life, which was like, sounds strange, but I was like, wow, now I get to experience a cast, and everyone's like, that is so weird. Why do you want a cast? I'm like, well, I never had one, so, I want to see what it feels like. So it's like, when all your friends get braces in the middle school or whatever, and you're the only one without braces, and you want them because everyone else has them. So anyways, strange. But I was like, okay, I'm experiencing this, and the bone itself didn't hurt as bad. So I think, and it's, that time took so long, so that by the time I came back to the vault, I was ready, because I had missed it, and I was like, okay, like this, I'm over this broken hand, like I'm not afraid of this anymore. I want to get back to it. And so this time around, I think the timeline was much shorter, and there was something at the end of it. Like I had to be ready or not, I had to be ready. And so, yeah, I think it still haunts me just a hair, this one. But you just can't think about it much. I mean, or you think about it and then you just think, I think James has been really helpful. My husband has been really helpful just to put it in perspective. He's like, how many jumps do you average in a year? Probably, upwards of 1,000 or close to it. And he's like, okay, so the last time you broke a pole was in 2022. And so since then you've taken 3,000 jumps, say, or at least 2,500 jumps. And you've only broken the pole twice. So what's the percentage of it happening again? It's like next to nothing,
Yeah.
Compared to how many jumps we take each year. And so that kind of helped me and just put into perspective. And I think just talking with your coach, knowing why it happens, and while this situation, this most recent time, it's a little hard to pinpoint. We didn't know if it was overbent or if it was just nicked or whatever the case was. Yeah, it leaves a little doubt in your mind. But I think what helped me was that I wanted to make the Olympic final more than I cared about bringing another pole. So I was getting my butt on that stick again to just see what I could do. And I think it has, your original question was, does it make me a little bit nervous? And I think the answer is yes. It would be strange not to be nervous, I think. But I think just understanding, or accepting it could happen, and you probably won't get that hurt. And if it does, then you just get stitches again, or you're in a cast, or whatever the case. And so, and I think too, like, Essex, my pole brand, has been really supportive, especially because they didn't even know about it too at the beginning. We didn't really want to draw attention to it, just because you don't want, you just don't want extra noise, like it's already intense, an intense situation as is. And so when you start adding like 1,000 other voices and opinions, then it can become really distracting. And I just didn't think that I was in the mental state, because I was already being mentally taxed and challenged in new ways that I hadn't been in previous years. And so I just, again, that's kind of just clarification as to why we didn't tell a lot of people, because I just didn't think I could handle that external opinion of everyone else.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I still think about sometimes the pole breaking, but I also know that I love the sport. So you just kind of accept it for what it is and not think about it too much.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things, and I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to somehow kind of judge the whole Olympic experience based upon your sickness and everything, but there were reports that there were other people that were getting sick and stuff like that. Was sickness something happening to other athletes over there, and like with the U.S. Olympic team? I mean, was that something that you guys, it was just something going through the village there? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I don't think it was anything with the U.S. team in particular. The team docs are really good about just warning, I guess, what could be a threat to the team, which are things like norovirus, not only for our team, but for any team, anybody that was staying in the village, just because of the sheer amount of people that are there sharing that space and eating in that space. And so, it's hard to pinpoint. Nobody knows exactly what I had, but I don't know if anybody got what I had from the U.S. team, but I do know, and I've heard, several other people from other countries' teams that had been sick or dealing with their own illnesses, if you will. Yeah, it's different. It's definitely, the village life, the Olympic village life is something that I think if you are lucky enough to make an Olympic team, you should definitely experience at least once, or for a few days at least, because you're never going to experience anything like that. But at the same time, do I think there are better living accommodations? Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I don't regret
Sure.
living there until I got sick. I think it was just some, you had to experience it.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, the kind of the title of this podcast is Adversity and Perseverance, and you're kind of the poster child for that, at least in the last couple months, I think, for people that know your story and know what's going on. So how has this whole experience, because now that you've been back and you've been processing, and I'm sure a lot, I mean, I know I would be very introspective about, okay, I just got back from France. I just made the Olympic team. I just got really sick. I mean, I didn't even ask you this question, but how much weight did you lose in those 5 days up until competing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, because I didn't have a scale and we didn't really make it a priority to seek one out. But I will tell you, so I jumped Monday, we flew home Friday, and Friday night when I weighed myself, I was still 5 pounds underweight than when I left for France,
Wow.
17 days prior. So I'm sure I lost, I don't know, between 5 and 8 pounds probably, or maybe more, I'm not sure. But I think, yeah, and I mean, not to get too pole vault specific here, but I use big poles, stiff poles, because I'm fast and I'm strong. And that's kind of that's my edge, that's what kind of separates me from the rest, because I'm not a technical jumper. I'm getting better, I'm getting better technically, but people aren't going to look at my jump and be like, that is textbook, They're going to look at my jump and say she's fast and she's strong, and that's why she's on these big poles. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I was just kind of robbed of that, more so than I thought I'd admitted to myself at the time, and so we were trying to make adjustments that just, we were close, I finished 22nd, top 20. They took 20 girls to the final, so it was just kind of crazy. Out of the 32 girls, can't remember what the field size was that went. And so if I had just made 440 on the first attempt, I would have been in the final, and Wednesday would have been a different day, because by Wednesday I was feeling much better. But Wednesday, Thursday, Friday prior, I just didn't eat. I couldn't eat. Anything I ate just didn't stay. So in Saturday, I think, food was still a little bit, sounded repulsive to me. It just didn't sound very good. Yeah. And so Sunday was the only day that I could really eat real food. The nutritionists were great. They were feeding me banana oatmeal whey smoothies, which was the only thing that sounded somewhat decent to eat, prior to that Sunday day of fueling with real food. But yeah, it's just hard. Yeah. You do what you can, and maybe I should have tried harder, or maybe, I don't know. I mean, there's, like you said, I've been very introspective about what I could have changed, or should we have made different calls, or should our game plan had been a little different. I mean, it's easy now because it's over, and so how it came out, and clearly what we did it almost worked, but it didn't work, and so it's easy now to think about and name all the possibilities and other things that we should have done, could have, might have done differently. Yeah.
Well, one question I'm not going to ask you is, where do you go from here? Because that's something that I think you and James need to work through, and I don't want to ask you that because that's really none of our business on here. Mm. But I do want to ask about, in the context of processing, what is it after being sick, having disappointment, even though I know now, hopefully you can have an appreciation for the accomplishments you had, but also not meeting the goal that you set for yourself. As you step back, what is it that kind of grounds you? I know the Lord. Okay, that's a given. Mm-hmm. But what is it that grounds you and gives you a sense of solace in the midst of some disappointment and anger and frustration and hurt?
Yeah, and I think, you hit all of those emotions. I think I've felt all of them. People are like, oh, it has to be so cool. I'm like, actually, I'm just mad.
Yeah.
I know it's exciting and, everyone's really pumped up, but to me personally, having experienced it, knowing what I was capable of, all of that, it hurts. I'm sad. I feel embarrassed, and shame. I know I'll get kicked back for saying this, but there's an amount of shame that comes with it too, because, people look at you and they're like, you were supposed to do something good. And I think I did good, I represented myself the best I could under the circumstances that I was given. But, did I execute from a pole vault standpoint, to the best of my ability, no, I didn't, and people aren't afraid to tell you that, and that's just the brutal reality of sports, like you had a job and you had a job to jump well and potentially get a medal for your country, and you didn't do that. But on the flip side, I think what has brought me a lot of comfort is just my community, like everybody who has been a part of this journey and matters, like really matters, my family, our church family, my community, even strangers that I don't know, but have invested enough to know me, not to my core, but just to know my character and, know what my values are. They know that my well-being and mental health and happiness outside of sport is not rooted, or even in sport, is not rooted in performance alone. And so I think, as I process, that has been what's kept me on my feet and not completely allowed me to derail, because I have so many people like from all areas of life who have just, offered their support and, like, hey, it's no pressure from us. You did your best and you were dealt the hand you were dealt, and whatever, it's fine. You'll move on and it's going to be great. Whatever you do next, whatever you decide next, it's going to be, the fruit will be produced there too, which I think, I don't want to say it's rare, but I definitely am forever grateful for it, because, I've been there before where I feel like, oh gosh, what am I going to do without track? Or like, what am I going to do if I don't win this meet? Or how are people going to think of me? And you kind of just get sucked into this, I don't know, it's like a warped bubble, if you will, where it's not really reality, but you think it's your reality because you're in sport every day, day in and day out. And so, but yeah, I don't know. I guess my point is, what I'm trying to say is that my community has really played a major role in helping me process. And I will say too, like, at first I didn't really know what to think of it. I was just kind of like numb and in shock, I think, of everything that had happened. And how it's so fleeting. Like, you get to the Olympics and then all of a sudden it's over. And you're like, okay, I worked so many years for this and now it's just gone, you know? And so I think after the prelim too, I was thinking like, okay, suck this in, like soak all of this experience in, walk the village slowly, like take videos, like sit, as silly as it sounds, but like stand at the bottom of the Team USA house and just stare at it, like take it in, look at your room, connect with your teammates, meet new people, whatever, go and do all the things that the village had to offer, that Paris, was offering for Olympians. Like, go do that. Even if you feel like you don't deserve it in the moment, like I force myself to like really do that, and take it in, so that, and I'm glad I did that, because I really didn't want to, and I think the emotional processing happens, the moment you step off the track and you realize, okay, I haven't made the final, so now what? I've got 4 more days here, and I had planned to be in the final, preparing for the final. And so now, as I continue to process at home, I feel like I'm really thankful that I did that, and that I forced myself to, enjoy and take all of that in and just recognize it for what it is. And I will say, although I was sad, or, still have layers of sadness about it now, but hopefully my ultimate goal is that like the sadness and anger turn to fuel and not resentment, because it was out of my control. Most of it was out of my control. Sure, I could have made a better plan. My coach and I could have done maybe some things differently. I'm not sure. But, you could speculate all you want. But at the end of the day, like, I couldn't have done anything about being sick. I couldn't have made it quicker. I couldn't do anything about my hand. You just have to kind of endure it. And I think one thing that was really helpful for me, which was hard to ask for, but like, just ask for people to help you, like, hey, can you pray for me? I'm really sick. I'm pretty sure I texted you that, and I was like, I'm really sick, and I don't know what to do. And I'm at this point where I'm like, I have no idea. And I think same thing holds true having been home. And while I'm healthy, my hand is healed, and, I'm obviously not sick anymore, but just processing the whole thing and where to go next and how to feel about track, and, like trying to recognize it for what it is, and not forget about the successes that I have had and the career that I do have. And it's not all bad, just one little bad blip in it doesn't define the career, but like ask people to lift you up in prayer, and that helps kind of put things into perspective. Yeah.
Were you able to practice your French?
Yeah. Yeah, I practiced my French. I have a funny story. I don't know if this is church appropriate, but it's funny. So I was a French major for anybody that doesn't know. And I'm really shy when it comes to speaking French, especially to French people, because I sound like an American speaking French. And that's how I was taught from Americans. And the French, like French, really sound different, and their accent is really beautiful. And they speak with a lot of confidence. And that's an area where I should probably work on. Even when I was teaching your girls, I was like, I know you don't want to talk to me, and I don't want to talk to you in French, but we have to do it.
Yeah.
And we did it, and it was fine. But I do think teaching them French really helped me like pick up on grammar, because, I was learning alongside them really more than they probably thought. So it helped me out a ton. But yeah, I was trying to act like our little tour guide as best I could, especially in restaurants. Like I knew enough French to order and get us around and ask questions and stuff like that. But I was ordering duck, and so the French word for duck is canard with an A, like canard. And I accidentally used an O, like co, fill in the blank, but that means your bottom. So the waiter was like, you don't want to order that. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so embarrassing. And so we had a table of like,
I'll have a plate of bottom, please.
Yeah. But he thought it was great, and he corrected me, and that was really nice. And he took the time to explain like pronunciation matters, and so different syllables can mean different things. And so when you're at a restaurant, make sure you have a hard A and not an O when you're ordering the duck. But I love duck, and so it was just really good. But he was like, that was our best dinner. We had probably, I don't know, like 15 of us at least at this dinner. And, everyone was like, oh, you're not going to get a table for 15 people in the city of Paris. I'm like, yeah, we are. Like people loved us. And so it was really fun. We had this nice young waiter, and he thought it was a hoot. And so,
see, those are good things.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a good experience. Good experience for everybody. And even the French people too, I think,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good.
Well, I think your story, I think it's really relevant right now, because there's a lot of people that are going through a lot. Mm-hmm. And throughout the history of humanity, that's always been the case. But today, there is definitely more kind of an anxiety, fear. The other day, I turned on the news. Well, actually, it came up on my news feed, and then I saw it later. There was a plant in Perry, Iowa that just closed, and within hours, 25% of the town is without jobs, So there's a lot of things going on. And so when people hear this, I think in some way, even though they're not pole vaulters, we're not pole vaulters, your experience, what you've dealt with really resonates. And I think we've entered a time in Christianity, especially in this country, which is actually, I think, a gift. And that is the milquetoast Christianity that says everything's fine. God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. That's been pretty much dashed. And true Christianity, which I'm going to read from James here in a minute, I think really reflects the ups and downs, of what life is. Mm-hmm. And so in James chapter 1, verses 2-4, a very familiar text, we read, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." And I think, part of that, I could go on and read, there's more to it, but the idea is we don't really think of trials as a joy, because when we're going through it, it's anything but joyful in our minds and our heads. But I think in retrospect, like what you have gone through, and even the trials to getting to the Olympics and then getting to the Olympics, you've kind of built a reservoir that you can connect with more. Your net is broader now in terms of the people that you can connect with and help. And I said in our last podcast, and I really mean this, I see you as a mentor in many ways. And even though what you went through stinks in terms of, some of the stuff from slicing your hand open to having sickness, especially that kind of sickness where you're losing weight, you can't fuel your body in a sport that you have to fuel, especially in pole vault, because so much of it's built on strength. But in retrospect, and I'm not saying this to make you feel better, you and I have talked about this, I think in many ways, though, you will be more empathetic, and you'll probably be able to connect with people that I can't connect with in terms of some of the experience that you went through.
Yeah.
And I think people listening to the podcast are going through things, and this is really helpful. There's somebody that went through this on a very big stage, and they've learned from it.
Yeah.
And they're not making light of saying everything's just fine and dandy. No. I mean, you said you're still mad about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's something that's part of the processing, right? So anyways, I just wanted to say that because I know for our people, and people, I know they've come up to you, they've come up to me too and talked about how much they've seen you grow over, since the time you've been here. Mm-hmm. And I always tell them that growth is kind of going through the valleys. It's not.
For sure.
It's not always on the mountaintop, right? Yeah,
because I think, we've talked about this too, and anybody who's grown up in the church, you kind of can recall this too. Like, things are good. It's sometimes hard to thank God, or just you kind of forget. You're like, oh yeah, things are great, and you just keep on, whatever. But when things are bad, sometimes you have no choice but to fall to your knees and call for help. And you realize, how little you can do alone.
Yeah.
And James's sister got me this book. It's called it's Every Moment Holy. It's a book of just everyday litanies, I think they are, or litanies, I think. And there's two in there, and one is called For Those That Compete, and the other is called For Those That Fear Failure. And I read them all last year when I was trying to make the world team, because I was going through some vertigo and whatever. I was just feeling physically not well. And then, this year I've kept them in my mind because they are true, and they've helped me kind of put into perspective that even if you miss whatever mark you've set for yourself, right? It's not necessarily failure, but I'm going to butcher the quote, but there's a quote in there, or a part in there that I want to quote, and it says who says that your greatest victories aren't clothed in disguise of defeat and dismay? Why wouldn't God, who's to say God wouldn't use those as the greatest victories, or your greatest lessons, or your greatest strengths, or whatever, to make them evident to you? And I think that is becoming more apparent to me, and it makes you more empathetic to other people.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times in sport or out of sport, especially on social media nowadays, for people my age or even younger, you think everyone lives this perfect life, and you get this warped reality of no one has pain, and no one suffers, and no one has any, everybody's rich, and everybody has everything they want, and there's no hardship. And that's such crap. It's not true at all.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's just when you do face those trials and tribulations, I think it's just a reminder not only to humble you, but just to, you're just like everyone else.
Yeah.
Everyone's going through something. And I think too, what I would like to see more of, and what I hope to be is, and I hope it's taken this way, and I know it will be from our people, but I know in the athletic world it can be seen sometimes when people talk about their failures or whatever, it's coming across as oh, you're just upset because you did bad, or because you didn't do what you wanted, and that's not my goal. I don't meddle aside. I don't care. I just wanted to go out there and do my best, and I didn't, and so that's what's bothering to me, is that I didn't do my best. I couldn't do my best.
Yeah.
Under the circumstances that I was given. And so, but really the bigger point is just to let people know that they're not alone.
Yeah.
I don't care if you do track, or if you're in a job, or if you're just a regular school student, or whatever, you're in college, or you're retired, or whatever. It doesn't matter what season of life you're in, you're still going to face trials and tribulations. And I think that is the bigger mission at hand, is if we can talk in a way about our struggle, then perhaps we can bond together. And isn't there, I forget the verse, but isn't there scripture that talks about sharing your brother's burden?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think that, there's some relevance to that. It's not to wallow in it, but just, lift each other up and be there for each other. I think that's what our whole country is missing, is that, stuff is hard, but why are we dividing instead of coming together?
Yeah.
In all areas of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the family, and in friendships, in the church, and your workplace, or whatever. Yeah.
And what you said, and I think it's a great way to close this episode, but what what appears to be defeat, ultimately out of that defeat comes victory, and that's the cross. That's the whole basis of Christianity. When people look to the cross, they see, a crucifix. They see a man that is being executed, right? And so that's why, like in Islam and other religions, they don't even believe Jesus died on the cross, because no great prophet could die such a humiliating death. And yet, out of that death is defeated, and the resurrection comes from death. But first, there has to be death.
Yeah.
And as baptized Christians, that's our whole theology of baptism. We've died with Christ, and every day is to be a dying to ourselves so that we are living in the newness of life and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So, yeah. Well, thank you, Bridget. We're glad you're back.
I'm glad to be back too. It feels really good.
Yeah.
It's good to, I'm now in the off season, so it's, James is making fun of me. He's like, "Why are you eating Pop-Tarts?"
You deserve that.
It's just funny, but it's that too. It's okay to like let loose. And I was telling his parents, my in-laws, just last night at dinner, I was like, it feels good to just be silly. Just like let go. And while track and field is so fun and it's so awesome in so many ways, but it's a grind, and you got to be mentally sharp. And I feel like this year I've done, like I said, more things that have been out of my comfort zone than I have in past years. And while I've gotten to be stronger because of them, it's kind of exhausting sometimes, because you're like, got to be on all the time, and you got to be sharp. Your brain has to be sharp, and you got to show up, and you got to fake it till you make it at some meets, and that's exhausting.
And now you can let loose and have fun. Remember the words of Hightower from Police Academy. In order to get to it, you've got to go through it.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's been fun.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, just be silly. And, I was going through the grocery store. I'm like, man, Pop-Tarts sound really good.
Now, what flavor Pop-Tart?
I got strawberry, which James is like, that's not even the best kind. But I grew up eating strawberry Pop-Tarts, every once in a while.
I'm a brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tart person.
Yeah. Pop-Tarts float pretty hard around the Virginia Tech track and field team. So Bob, my coach, likes them, and one of my teammates, Rachel, she also loved Pop-Tarts.
One of the best bad for you foods out there.
Yeah. And just sugary cereal. Like, I never buy cereal. I'm like, man, that sounds so good. So, I've just given myself the liberty to, I don't know.
Yeah.
Enjoy myself.
You need that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a forever, obviously, it's not a forever habit, but I think I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
Just being a normal person.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's great. Well, this has been great. Thank you again. And we'll have you back on, but this has been great because, like I said, there was so much kind of anticipation building up to this, and it's good to reflect now on everything that happened in terms of going over to France, coming back, processing. And I think the main thing is again, learning from adversity and realizing that, the adversity we go through, first of all, it's temporal, right? It's not forever. And the second thing, though, is that we learn the most. I think what you said is so true. Whenever I'm praying the most is usually when I'm sick or something has just happened, tragedy. And, because, you do your morning prayers or your evening prayers and everything, but sometimes that's all you do. And when you're in the thick of things, you find yourself praying. I think Paul, talks about we should be praying without ceasing.
Yeah, but it's true.
But it's kind of like our thoughts are either on our mortality or somebody else's mortality, and then we're ready to actually have a conversation, do business with our God at that point.
So, right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bridget.
No, thank you guys.
Excellent.
It's been great.
Well, folks, that's it for this episode. We're so glad that Bridget was able to join us today. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at podcast@stphillipsblacksburg.org or podcast@anglicanprovince.org, and we will answer your questions in a future episode. Thanks so much. Have a great day.